I'll call to order the November Finance Committee, and I will poll the committee members to be sure everyone's present. Mayor Pro Tem Adams.
Here.
Councilmember McIntosh.
Here.
And Councilmember Taylor.
President.
I also see here today Councilmember Scipio and Larson. Are there any other folks out there that from the council that I can recognize?
Mundy.
Oh, Councilmember Mundy is here. Okay.
And Burke.
Mundy and Burke. So we got everybody. So thank all of y'all for joining us today. I can only see so many of you at a time on the screen. With that, we will get going. First thing we'll do is the consent prior to the, oh, excuse me. Hang on a minute. Getting ahead of myself. Let me read the following statement. Due to the pandemic, all committee members are participating virtually. For virtual meetings, committee members will be muted until asked to be heard. When there's a vote, it will be necessary to take a roll call vote. Committee member will be recognized, raise their hand, and state their vote. So everybody knows how to do this. We will begin with the consent agenda. Ms. Adams has already asked for C1 and C2. Mr. McIntosh has asked for C7. Mr. Larson has asked for C11 and 12. Are there any other items any council member would like pulled?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to add 13.
C13. Any others? With hearing none, can I get a motion from a committee member to approve the balance of the consent?
I would move for the approval of the balance of the consent agenda.
Can I get a second? So I have a motion by Adams, seconded by McIntosh to approve the balance of the consent agenda. I will now poll the committee. Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh?
Aye.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes.
And Mr. Clark votes aye as well. So those are approved. We will go in numerical order. We will start with C1 if the clerk can read that.
Item C1, first quarter budget update.
Okay, Mr. Tesh, I know you're out there somewhere. Would you like to make some comments?
Yes, sir, Chairman Clark. So good afternoon, Chairman, Mayor Pro Tem, and members of the committee and council. I can do the 30 or 60 second update, and then we can get into specific details there. But this is the first quarter budget update that the Budget and Performance Management Department does here in the first quarter of a fiscal year before we go into the real budget season. So that memo includes year end for FY21, shows revenues and expenditures, and essentially that we added roughly $11 million to fund balance in the general fund for the fiscal year ending June 30th.
Can we bring that chart up?
Yes, sir. I sure can.
I'm not sure who does that.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
the reason I pulled this, you usually ask why.
Well, I was going to let him just introduce it real quick, then I'm going to go turn it over to you.
Okay.
Let him just show the general fund balance there.
I was going to, yes, sir, show this and then say that there are several budget drivers on the pages that are for FY23. So this is a retrospective of FY21 and a very early look at some of the general fund budget drivers and other fund budget drivers for FY23.
Okay. Thank you very much. Ms. Adams, you asked for this. Do you have any specific questions or comments?
Yes, it was basically about this slide. The reason I pulled it, again, I always think in years past, we didn't do this when I first came on the council, but we do it now. We've been doing it for a while to give the public an update of where we are and what it looks like. And the drivers, if Mr. Tesh could just go quickly again, this is the main slide of these items on this slide, as well as our fund balance and some of the potential issues that's going to impact us for 22-23. He doesn't have to go deep on them, but I think it's important that we go through it.
Okay. Mr. Tesh, if you could just hit the highlights there on potential issues.
Yes, sir, and thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So the first one on there is the current recycling contract. The city is looking to renew that recycling contract or potentially to look at a new way of providing that service, has issued bids, and we are essentially telling the city council here and the public that based on how that information came in, it may be significantly higher in FY23 than in FY22. So staff, including Assistant City Manager Taylor, is currently looking at this, but it is a potential budget driver for FY23. We have several things here related to employee compensation and benefits. So the first for the local government employees retirement system, as well as the Winston-Salem police officers retirement system, potential increases there for retirement. The board for Algiers has not met yet and made a decision this year. So we're just putting out there that it has been for several years in a row we've seen increases, and so we expect to see increases as well. Hopefully we'll have more information when we do budget updates in January or February. Scrolling down here in terms of employee compensation, always looking at the effect of merit on base budget, and we'll be looking at what peer jurisdictions are doing and what resources we have available in terms of making merit available for employees. A very quick note about the potential for a public safety career ladder that may be reviewed as part of the FY23 budget. There are a couple of different options to select from, and so if we were to go that route, would again provide more details in a future update after analyzing that more thoroughly. And then the last two notes on here are related to things outside of the general fund. So the first one, the Public Assembly Facilities Management Funds, looking specifically at the fairgrounds, how we end the year with the Carolina Classic Fair. So hopefully we'll have much better information on that here in the coming months. But then also, again, looking at how COVID has affected some of our other public assembly facilities, including the Convention Center, Bowman Gray Stadium, Truist Stadium. And so hopefully we'll have a better idea going again into January or February, what that looks like for the fiscal year 22, but then also what it may mean budget-wise for 23. The last note there being the Stormwater Management Fund. I believe we've talked about this for many years in a row, potentially the need to raise stormwater fees in order to create the cash flow and to meet our debt obligations. So I think you will potentially see a recommendation related to stormwater fees as well coming in FY23.
Okay.
One more question or need for comment is the 1.9 million in the undesignated category for the general fund balance, Mr. Tesh. Can you explain to the public what that means?
Yes, ma'am. So looking at that chart on the right, there's $26 million in restricted funds. So those are monies restricted by state statute that should not be spent and can't be spent. The city has a 14% general fund balance reserve policy, which means that we are trying to set aside 14% of the current year's expenditures. And then 1.4 million in appropriated. So we used $1.4 million to balance the budget for FY22. And that 1.9 million undesignated would be what is above and beyond those restrictions or committed purposes. I would say in talking with the chief financial officer that the LGC is looking at potential recommendations for the reserve there to be at a higher number than 14%. I believe they're looking at 16%, which is roughly the equivalent of 2 months operating cash. So while that $1.9 million is undesignated and not committed, you may see recommendations from the LGC related to a higher reserve coming in the not too distant future.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
I would move, well, is this information?
This is information only, so we'll
It's
just
just information.
accept
Thank
that.
you.
We'll now go to C2. If the clerk will please read that one.
Item C2, information on quarterly key work items, capital projects, and performance indicators data.
Ms. Adams, you had this one. Do you have a comment?
Yes, I do appreciate the effort that staff puts into all these charts for us. I am still concerned about the delays and things like that on these projects. If you look at the chart that has the total key work item summary, page 1, it shows for each committee that these projects were basically vetted through or coming through. I still would like to know, and maybe it was in here and I didn't see it, another chart or chart that tells us where we are so far as 2014 and 2018 bond projects, completion or delay. If we see something or know that all the 2014's been done, then the public can feel good about what they did when they voted for them. And as to where we are with 2018, being that 2022 is coming at us. Because if we ever have to ask for another bond referendum, Chair Clark, I want the people to believe that we are efficiently and productively managing the money, but getting these projects done. And if I know I saw delays in here for, let's say, the supply chain or contractors or, things like that, but I'm concerned about completion, quality completion, sir.
Okay. Duly
Mr.
noted.
Gary.
Good afternoon, Chairman Clark, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, Mayor Joines, members of City Council. Yeah, we are all concerned about completion dates. Right now, we're working on, Mr. Taylor and I are brainstorming some ideas of enhancing our capital project management. Yes, there are supply side and contract issues, but these projects have to be completed. There's a much more detailed report on Public Works tomorrow that goes through all of our bond projects that we have all the way back to 2014. It is our intent, Lord willing, and the creek doesn't rise, to get as many of these done this fiscal year as possible. But we'll be coming back with more information. They need to be done.
Okay, thank you. That's for information only. Next item is C7. If the clerk will please read that one.
Item C7, resolution revising erosion control fees subsequent to the adoption of House Bill 489.
Mr. McIntosh, you asked for this one.
Yeah, typically I like to shed a little light on anything that I think is going to affect housing prices in Winston-Salem and construction prices. So if I could have staff just do a walkthrough on this, I'd appreciate it.
Mr. Huff, are you out there somewhere?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Could you comment on this one, please?
Yes, sir. Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Mayor Joines, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, members of the City Council. House Bill 489 came to us really from the builders and realtors, where this was a part of various building code and regulatory activities. And the specific portion that we're concentrating on tonight is regulatory changes with regard to erosion control fees, mainly for single-family residential property construction. And 489 changed the way that local governments or delegated erosion control programs can bill and charge fees for the inspection and plan creation of single-family residential properties. So mainly it hits at the heart of single-family properties where the developer and the builder are the same entity, where the bill does not allow for successive charges that exceed $100 per developed lot. So what staff did to comply with 489 is seek out the assistance of the local home builders association and our other in-house experts, and basically came up with two fee strategies to accommodate 489. One was a flat fee lot schedule for whatever single family lot. If it was above an acre, below an acre, charge a $100 flat fee. The other option was what you have before you for consideration tonight, which is very similar to the fee strategy that we currently employ. The developers, or the builders and realtors, chose this fee strategy that you have before you and kind of advocated for it. So happy to answer any questions.
If I may.
Go ahead, Jeff.
So one side of this is the impact on housing prices. The other side is the impact on the cost of providing the services. So from what I'm hearing is there's going to be minimal impact sort of on both sides. We are not going to be driving up costs, and we're not going to suffer any significant hits to our revenue side. Would that be close to correct?
Yes, sir. Councilmember McIntosh, this fee structure more closely mimics what we're doing right now with our fee structure and allows us to comply with the facets of 489.
Great.
And depending on the type of development, fee losses or revenue losses would be minimal.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments on this one? If not, I would look, Mr. McIntosh, can you make a motion, please, then?
Motion to approve item C7.
Is there a second? We have a
Second.
motion, second to approve C7. I'll do a roll call vote. Ms. Adams,
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh,
Aye.
Mr. Taylor,
Yes.
and chair votes aye. That is approved. We will now go to C11.
Item C11, resolution authorizing the release of sale restrictions on a lot sold to Old Salem and requesting consideration that the proceeds of the future sale shall be designated for a specific public purpose.
Mr. Larson, you had this one pulled. Do you have a question or comment?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. In fact, I've got 3 items that we're all going to be dealing with real estate in the next 3 items. This particular piece of property was acquired by Old Salem in 2004, I believe, 2004, for $8,300. The intent was to use it as part of the Stockburger Farm development that Old Salem was looking at the time. So that was several years back, and now Old Salem has apparently opted not to pursue Stockburger Farm and is monetizing the land around Stockburger for their other operations. I have a couple questions about this particular parcel. One, is it a buildable lot? Can anybody tell me whether it meets code requirements as a buildable lot currently? Can we put a house on it?
Councilmember Larson, good afternoon. Chairman Clark, Mayor Joins, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, members of the City Council. I think that staff, we need to look at that more closely. When we were originally contemplating, that lot ourselves, I think we saw it as part of a larger acquisition. So we need to do a little more research into whether that parcel by itself would be buildable.
Yeah. Okay. Second question involves the value of the property. Do we have a current tax value on this property? What is the value over the last 16 years or 17 years, whatever?
We can provide that information.
You provide that, and sort of the question is, if the value is increased, where that value is being applied. And thirdly, I don't see anything in the agreement that defines how this property would revert to the city if it were to revert, because Old Salem was not complying with the original intent of the property sale. So I don't know if we would have to buy it back at appraised value, whether we would buy it back at the original purchase price, in which case, it would be a bargain sale for us probably. I think I'd like a little more explanation as to whether or not there's increased value here for this piece of property. I know that there's going to be land acquisition, and this whole area is undergoing significant change and development, and we may end up finding ourselves having a valuable piece of property here that we could market, if not use ourselves.
Councilman Larson, the resolution in this particular action would basically waive the sale restrictions that went along with the original sale, and then the city would allow Old Salem to use the proceeds from any sale that they would realize. It would have to still be used for a public purpose, mainly for their operations, programming, and other activities.
This wasn't the intent originally of the sale of this property to Old Salem, though. The intent of this property was part of the Stockburger house, really for horticulture and agricultural interpretation. So if the money is going to be made available, it should probably be targeted toward to the gardens of Old Salem as the most compatible use for that money, in view of the monetizing of the asset, which will no longer be used for the horticultural purposes of Stockburger Farm.
The mayor had a comment. Okay, go ahead, John. Finish up.
No, that's it. Let the mayor talk.
Okay, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Councilman Larson. My understanding is that there is a developer that's interested in this lot and putting it with another one for developing some residential units there. So I think we can, we are very interested in a lot of these properties to create some affordable housing opportunities. And unfortunately, we got outbid, so to speak, but I think we can accomplish part of our objective by allowing this lot to be sold to a developer and the proceeds. I think, John, that's a great suggestion, is requiring it to go to the gardens of Old Salem to get to the original purposes there. Thank you.
Yeah.
Ms. Adams, you had a comment.
Yes, I was going to ask, what are the dimensions? What is this? Quarter lot, third lot, acre? What do we have?
The lot, I can get you the dimensions, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, to the acreage is 0.15 acre.
Okay. As Councilmember Larson said, I know a lot, maybe people that's not from Winston remember this neighborhood growing up, but there were houses all along there, both sides of the street. Density, Councilmember Scipio probably remembers too. And Councilmember Larson, correct me if I'm wrong, these houses were very historical in nature in the way they were built, the architecture and that sort of thing. I think also that, again, as we discussed several times before, when we are now getting ready to sell lots that we own, if it's buildable, I think we need to hold on to it and bank it. If a developer, mayor, or somebody is trying to put parcels together, but if they need our parcel to make it happen, the public good is housing, affordable housing. And I think that's the route we need to go to, Councilmember Larson.
Let me ask staff, if I'm reading this correctly, we don't own the lot. Old Salem owns the lot, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, we don't own this lot. We sold it to them with a restriction. And they're simply asking for that restriction to be released, but this is not our land.
But Councilmember Clark, does it not say those about the attached resolution authorizes the release of sale restrictions? Described. And directs that the proceeds of a future sale of the property be used for public purpose.
The city,
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I think that's for us to decide. When we sold it to them, it had a restriction on it. And we can release the restriction or we can do this or that. Is our city attorney out there?
I'm here.
Could you comment on this? Since we sold it with restrictions, if we release the restrictions, what comes next?
If City Council decides to release the restrictions and essentially allow Old Salem to sell the property without the restrictions, it could require, which is what the resolution is attempting to do, that those sale proceeds be used for the original purpose that the property was conveyed initially to Old Salem. And that was to carry out certain public purposes. So the intent of this resolution is basically to say, okay, Old Salem, you can sell the property, but those proceeds have to be used for that same purpose that you bought the property for originally.
And how do we define a public purpose? Is that for us to define or them?
I think the last time it was defined by City Council in conjunction with Old Salem. I think the resolution kind of generally specifies public purpose, but if you want to add some more specificity to it, you certainly can.
All right. I'm probably going to suggest we hold this in committee, but Ms. McIntosh, you got a comment?
Yeah, just if we're going to pull this, if we're going to pull our restrictions off of it, I'm going to come down on if there's housing going to be built on it, I'm in support of it. And that versus having it remain as a vacant lot for some period of time, you know, if it's going to be housing, I'm going to be thumbs up.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I just certainly agree with that. I don't think this is by itself is really buildable unless you got to marry it up with another lot or two to make it work. And
it's 50 foot across on the front and 133 foot deep. It's a very small lot.
Yeah, so I think we would be sitting there with a vacant lot.
Yeah, let's hold it in committee. We got some questions that need to be answered. And I think maybe if the staff will meet with Old Salem and see if they'll come up with a specific designation for a public purpose. Because to me, a public purpose could be simply giving Old Salem the money for their budget because they serve a public purpose as a general rule. But I think we need to be a little more specific there. But if with no objection, let's hold it for a month and see what we can do there. And the questions I've got, is it a buildable lot, tax value, things of that sort?
Councilmember Clark, if I may.
Yeah.
The public purpose originally, when the city sold the lot to Old Salem, stated that it should be used in support of its operations, public programming, and activities. Okay. So the resolution before you today proposes the same restriction and use for the funds that will be realized from the sale. But if you all want to make that more specific, we can certainly get with Old Salem.
But
And-
that's a pretty general, they can use it for their operational type work. Okay, we're going to hold it for a month if that's okay. John, is that okay with you?
Yeah, the last comment is the city didn't sell this property to Old Salem for it to monetize it for general use. It sold it for very specific use, and that was the horticultural program. So I think we could keep that in mind as we look forward to how we want to disperse this property.
Okay, we're going to hold C11 in committee. C12, if the clerk will please read that one.
Item C12, resolution authorizing the acquisition of property for the Little Creek Greenway Phase 2 project by deed or condemnation.
Mr. Larson, you also have this one pulled.
Yeah, I had a very simple question on this one. If we could go to the map that illustrates what's going to be actually purchased or dealt with. And the area shaded is a rather large piece of property. And I understand from reading the context, it sounds like the actual right-of-way that what we're using is considerably less than that. Can somebody explain to me sort of the variance between if we're acquiring an easement on all of this property or temporary construction easement on all of it, or exactly what is happening with all this shaded area?
Mr. King?
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Joins, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, council members. So Councilmember Larson, what you see shaded in there, that parcel is about 7 acres in size. And so what is being sought to help with phase 2 of Little Creek Greenway is about a total of 27, about 30-some thousand square feet of easements, various easements for drainage and construction of the trail. So it is really more centered. You can see basically the trail and where the floodway is. You're really looking more in this area. This is just simply highlighting the parent parcel where those easements would be located. So it's a fraction of that 7-acre parcel that's in question.
So this map is not an accurate representation of the easements we're actually acquiring.
This map is simply showing you the PIN number from which the easements are being required, and that PIN number is a 7-acre parcel.
Right. Okay.
This is not getting into the detail of showing you exactly the square footage and detailed location of those easements. This is simply showing you the parent parcel for where we're trying to acquire those easements from.
And how wide is the right of way for this greenway?
I know Robert Presswood is here. Robert may know that number off the top of his off his head better than me.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Mayor Joins, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, and members of council. The right-of-way that we're acquiring, or the easement we're acquiring, varies quite a bit through here, but in general, it's about 40 foot wide. There are some drainage easements and others that makes it wider in certain areas, and then there's some construction easements that revert back to the property owner once the project is completed.
So we do not take possession of this property. It's just an easement permanently across this property.
That is correct.
That might be helpful for the meeting Monday night to show what part of that is actually the easement.
We can work on that.
Do that. Yep.
Okay, it's John, I think that would be very helpful, don't you?
Yeah, I'd appreciate it. It's just a little confusing as to what we're actually acquiring here and how we're acquiring and what we end up with.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on this? We're going to have a little better map for Monday night. Can I get a motion on this then, please, from some of the committee members?
Move for approval.
We have a second. Motion is second on C12, acquisition of property on Little Creek Greenway. I will poll the committee. Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh?
Aye.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes.
Chair votes yes, that is approved. That's C12. We'll go to the last item from consent is C13. If the clerk could please read that one.
Item C13, resolution authorizing granting of an encroachment agreement on city-owned property located at Long Creek Park.
Mr. Larson, this is the last one you wanted pulled?
Yeah, this is the last real estate matter. And in this case, we have a garage that's built on property the city currently owns. And it looks like the largest part of the garage is in fact on our parkland. And apparently what we're offering to give here is a easement in perpetuity that's expansive, not just the footprint the garage is sitting on, but in fact 20 feet in all directions of that garage building as a right in perpetuity for all future owners to occupy and use that land, and with no compensation to the city. And I'm kind of curious as to why we're not selling the property if we're going to give an easement in perpetuity that in fact is going to give up our rights of controlling on this property. In fact, when at no cost to the property owner who's enjoying the benefits of this city property being available to them. Why are we not selling the property instead of just giving them an easement on perpetuity?
Good afternoon, Chair, Mayor Joins, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, and members of City Council. When we acquired Long Creek Park, we noticed that there were several homeowners that own land and homes around the park, and many of these homeowners had various structures, whether it's a fence, whether it was in this case a garage that was built on the land when it was actually owned by the former owners of Long Creek Golf Course. In the past, when this has happened, when we've acquired land and these existing structures have been in place, we've approached the homeowners with providing a lease agreement to give some room around that structure with some guidelines in place for maintenance and appearance purposes for that. And this falls in line with the way these matters have been handled in a similar manner in the past. If someone were building something and wanted to build it onto city-owned land that was already existing city-owned land, we would negotiate with the homeowners and look to negotiate the sale or sale of some of that parkland for the homeowner so that we wouldn't get into these types of lease agreements.
Is this a lease or an easement?
It's an easement that's being granted to the homeowner that has some guidelines in place in terms of how the area should be maintained. It is in an area of the park where there is no development planned. It's currently being mowed and maintained by the homeowner. It's just provides some guidelines and some guidelines to the homeowners so they know what the city's expectations are in terms of appearance and maintenance.
I request then that if we have this kind of easement agreement, that in the event the garage ever disappears, that this becomes null and void. That this agreement becomes null and void, that the access to this property for the construction of a new building or such not be authorized. And if we have other examples of this same sort of thing, are we setting a precedent up and down the park with this sort of easement?
When we initially had our public input meetings with many of the homeowners there when we purchased this property, one of the things that we discussed as part of those meetings was if there were instances where we ran into or realized that homeowners had fences or buildings and some other things that were on city-owned land, that we would work with those homeowners to try to find an outcome that was amenable to both the homeowner and the city. And we're just doing what we can to adhere to those requests and those statements that were made to the community when we purchased Long Creek.
How much land are we talking about here, Mr.
It's approximately 0.12 acres, a little over a tenth of an acre.
You know, I'm kind of with John. I think we ought to just sell them the land.
Yeah, I just see either that or something's got to be written into this thing. It can't be in perpetuity for just a piece of land that we don't know how it's going to even be developed in the future. It seems like awfully open-ended, and particularly with no compensation at all to the city for it. It just seems to me to be a bad precedent to set. If we're going to do this sort of as a grandfathering in, then it ought to be a grandfather agreement where if in fact this property ever changes, if the conditions on this property ever change, then this agreement would be void. If the garage disappears or fire or what have you, that they're not automatically authorized to build another building back on the site, for example.
Any other
I'm sorry, Chair.
Any other thoughts from any committee members or anybody? Ms. Adams, this is your ward.
That's right.
Sorry.
I would suggest, Mr. Royston, that we go back and see if we can get Mr. Porter just to sell us the land without the agreement. So there's ours.
No, wait. We don't want the land. Their
Well,
house,
We own the land.
we
He
own the
said
land.
he would like to sell the property and is requesting an encroachment agreement.
He's going to sell his property, but he doesn't own the
Right.
land the garage sits on.
He
Mr.
can't
Royston,
sell the,
can we go back and rework this?
Mayor Pro Tem, Madam Chair.
For the park's sake and the people that live up there, okay?
Yes, yes.
And
yes, we can.
as Councilmember Larson said, just like we're seeing tonight, whether it's Old Salem or anybody else, Muddy Creek, I think we need to look and see if we have other examples like this that'll be coming at us as some council members are trying to enlarge their footprint in parks and recreation, greenways. I think now is the time that we take a look at it and see how we make this a win-win for everybody.
We can go back, get with the city attorney's office and rework the agreement and see
Thank
what
you.
other options are available.
Okay, and I would suggest you work with Ms. Adams. This is her ward.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll hold that in.
Clark.
Yes.
Chair, just
Yes.
for reference purposes here, the tax value on the entire parcel is $20,000 for the land. So we're not talking about a lot of money involved here, but I agree, it's cleaner. It would seem to be cleaner to do a sale agreement than something in perpetuity. So,
Yep,
Thank
yep, got it. We're going to hold that in committee as well. That's C13. So C11 and C13 are held in committee. That is all on the consent. We're done with it. We will now move to the general agenda. Everybody just bear with me a minute. Let me get my thing up here. We will go to G1 if the clerk will please read that one.
Item G1, resolution awarding contract for asphalted concrete to Yakin Valley Paving.
Any questions or comments on this one? This is just, I think this is a yearly asphalt contract that we do.
Move for approval.
We have a motion to approve. We have a second.
second,
We have a motion second to approve G1. I will poll the committee. Ms. Adams,
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh,
aye.
Ms. Taylor,
Yes.
and chair votes yes. That's G1. G2, if the city clerk will please read this one.
Item G2, bond order authorizing the issuance, directing the application to the Local Government Commission and requesting local government commission approval of water and sewer system revenue and revenue refunding bonds, Series 2022 of the City of Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
Ms. Saunders, can you give us 2 minutes on this one?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Chairman Clark, Mayor Joines, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, and members of the City Council. The resolution before you today authorizes the city to request the Local Government Commission approve the issuance of water and sewer revenue and revenue refunding bonds, Series 2020. The bond order establishes a not-to-exceed amount of $80 million. $70 million of that is for new projects that are listed in Exhibit A. Those projects were previously appropriated by City Council and a project budget ordinance. The projects that we're looking at are advanced meter reading infrastructure, collection system improvement program, and Muddy Creek Basin capital improvements. We're also asking for authority to refinance $10 million of the 2017 series bonds if market rates are favorable. We intend to sell the bonds in January or on January 12th, 2022. R.W. Baird is the underwriter and the local firm in Winston-Salem. The local government commission will consider this item at their December the 7th meeting. And this is just a reminder that the bonds are a special obligation of the city and they're paid for from the pledged revenue of the water and sewer system. And we recommend approval of the bond order.
Thank you. Is there any other questions or comments on this one? Could I get a motion then, please?
So move.
Move for approval.
We have a motion by Mr. Taylor, second by Ms. Adams. I will poll the committee. Ms. Adams,
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh,
Aye.
Mr. Taylor,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. That is approved. That was G2. We'll now move to G3. If the
Item
city,
G.
please read this one.
Item G3, resolution of the City of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, approving an amendment to an installment purchase contract with the North Carolina Municipal Leasing Corporation to finance and refinance certain facilities and capital assets and related matters.
Ms. Saunders, can you give us 2 minutes on this one, please?
Sure. This resolution is to authorize limited obligation bonds in the amount not to exceed $60 million. $18,250,000 of these bonds are new money, and they're listed in Exhibit A. These bonds were approved in the 2018 CIP that council approved by project budget ordinance. And I might note that about 2/3 of these monies have already been spent. So a major part of this will simply be a reimbursement to monies already spent on these projects. We also are asking for about $40 million, again, to refinance if market rates are favorable in January when we sell these bonds as well. These bonds are secured by, or there's a security interest provided for in the Benton Convention Center and in the Bryce A. Stewart Building through a deed of trust. And we also recommend approval of this resolution. As I said, Exhibit A includes a list of all the projects. The major project in this group is Bowman Gray Stadium of $9 million. Bellevue Rec Center of 1.5, Long Creek Development of 2, Caladium of 2, Bankruptcy Court $1,750,000, and pedestrian safety of $2 million. And I might add that this is could be in some cases partial funding for this project. This list is not meant to be a total project cost list, for example, but just the limited obligation bonds portion of these projects.
What's your anticipated savings on the $40 million refinance?
Honestly, it's not it's not very good right now. Our minimum savings would be 5%, and it's very close to that. That's why I'm asking for authority, but potentially we may not do it when it comes to January. So in our financial policy, unless we have a net present value savings of 5%, we wouldn't refund the bonds, and that's about where we are now. So
That'd still be $2 million.
good. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Okay. She said most of the $18 million has been spent already, as you can see from the list. Can I get a motion to approve, please?
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion by Adams, second by McIntosh. I will poll the committee. Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh?
Aye.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes.
Chair votes yes. G3 is approved. We'll now go to G4. If this clerk will please read that one.
Item G4, resolution of the City of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, approving an installment purchase contract and related matters.
Ms. Saunders, you will give you one more shot here.
All righty, and this will be the last one for fiscal 22. That's all the debt we're issuing this year. This is for our equipment financing program. In the 80s, we developed a leasing program at the City of Winston-Salem where we obtain low-cost financing to buy fire trucks, heavy equipment, police cars, commuter equipment, and any other operating equipment for the city. The resolution approves a new financing of $20 million, which should get us through the next 18 for 24 months of equipment purchases. The amount, as I said, is not to exceed $20 million. And the resolution asks for approval to enter into a contract with TD Equipment Finance. The tax exempt structure is a 59-month term, and the interest rate that we've been guaranteed is 0.799%. Exhibit A lists the proposers. Y River, who's our financial advisor, did a request for proposal, and the banks that are listed are the ones who actually sent a request. And Exhibit A also lists the entire list of vendors that were solicited and the demographics for TD Bank. And we request approval for this resolution.
Okay, we do this every other year. It's about $20 million every other year, and this pays basically allows us to amortize the costs over the life of the equipment. Is basically what I do, because it's 59 months, it's 5 years. Can I get a motion to approve, please?
Move for approval.
Second.
A motion by Adams, second by McIntosh. We will now vote. Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh,
Aye.
Mr. Taylor,
Yes.
and Chair votes yes. That G4 is approved. We'll now go to G5.
Item G5, consideration of items regarding the assignment of construction-related contracts for Marshall Park and the termination of the downtown development agreement.
This is an important development, so I'm going to ask Mr. King to present this.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Clark. I'll pull up my screen here and we'll kind of walk through this a little bit chronologically. So
Yeah.
we'll go all the way back to 2014 when $3 million worth of economic development bonds were set aside for the construction of Marshall Park. And so for everybody, just to get oriented, the area we're talking about, I think everybody knows this, but this is the area here at 4th, Trade, 3rd, and then Liberty would just be to the right there. So basically this area that you see right here for Marshall Park. So going back to 2014 with the $3 million in economic development bonds, fast forward to August of 2018, and council considered an item to enter into participate, financially participate, and basically provide financing for the construction of Marshall Park. So that was an agreement with Pepper Property Association, and that contemplated taking the $3 million in economic development bonds, adding another $930 to that, and then also considering about $700,000 worth of TIF financing to basically bring the city's participation in this up to about $4.6 million. That was August 2018 when council approved that. Subsequent to that, in January of 2019, the agreement based on that council item was executed to basically set forth those terms, and it was done through the downtown development statute that's referenced in your CARF. And again, that was with Pepper Property Association. And the thought at that time was going that route in conjunction with private development that was happening adjacent to the park. This is basically a bird's eye view looking down into the design for Marshall Park. So the thought at that time was the potential construction of these buildings that you can see here to the right of Marshall Park. So obviously, there were some issues getting Marshall Park and the construction off the ground. So as we move through chronologically, we get to August of 2021, and obviously the construction has not started, nor has it been completed. And obviously COVID, I think, was a big factor in that. So in August of this year, Pepper Property Association bid out the work for construction of Marshall Park, and you can see that referenced in your CARF. We had three local construction firms bid on that, and Frank L. Bloom Construction was the lowest bidder at $4.219 million. So that is more money than we had left in our budget item for construction of Marshall Park, which was around $2.69 million. After that August bid came in, work was done to try to value engineer the construction costs for Marshall Park down, and that got the number down from $4.219 million to $3.669. Add in $150,000 for Stimmel for limited construction oversight, and another $150,000 for contingency needed for the project, and that gets your total budget for your total cost for Marshall Park up to $3.969 million. When you subtract out basically the money that the city's got left, the $2.69 million, and then there's also money that's been pledged by the Millennium Fund, the amount of $300,000 to help bridge the gap for the construction of Marshall Park. That's in addition to $200,000 that's been pledged by the Millennium Fund for the construction of the public art centerpiece, which is a critical piece to Marshall Park. So when you take that number, you back out the money that the city has left in our budget and the money contributed by the Millennium Fund, the gap that's left in place is $979,089. So that was kind of looking through August. What we discovered is basically the terms of that January 2019 agreement with Pepper Property Association basically set forth a term of 24 months to complete Marshall Park. And obviously, as we sit here today, Marshall Park is not completed. So what you have before you today is a item that basically lays out two parts. And part one of your item today seeks to authorize the assignment of the construction-related contracts that were bid by Pepper Property Association under the auspice of the Downtown Development Statute, basically those would be assigned, we would assign those to the city, and the city would be working directly with Bloom and Stimmel for the construction of Marshall Park. The second part of that would be the termination of the downtown development agreement with Pepper Property Association, which is, again, the terms of which have expired. The third part that you have here, I guess the second piece, part one has got a couple of components, and then the second piece is the project budget ordinance amendment that reappropriates money from the 2014 and 2018 economic development bonds to basically fulfill that remaining $979,000 gap that would pay for the construction of Marshall Park. So again, we're seeking to authorize to assign those contracts to Bloom and to Stimmel and work directly with them on the construction of Marshall Park to end the downtown development agreement that we have with Pepper Property Association, and then a project budget ordinance amendment that basically moves the money to cover the remaining gap in Marshall Park. So as you can see here on the screen, this is the most recent revised rendering of Marshall Park. And I will be glad to answer any questions at this time.
Aaron, I've got two questions. One, this land slopes downhill. Will it continue to do that? And secondly, specifically, where are we getting the money from?
Yeah, so I'll handle the first one. I'm gonna let Scott Tesh handle the second one. So obviously, Councilmember Clark, you're right. There's fall from 4th Street coming down to 3rd Street right there. In the process of grading it, it will still continue to slope, but it will do so at a much more mild percentage there. So it will be regraded and it will still continue to slope, but not as great as before.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Tesh, where's the money coming from officially?
Yes, sir. As the second question with the money, a majority of the money will come from 2018 economic development bonds. The very small portion left over from 2014 economic development bonds, just over $40,000. So a majority of it comes from 2018 economic development bonds for sites and infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. Questions, comments from
Mr.
Mayor?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Just relative to your question about the source of the funds, we've been holding back a couple $1 million for the economic development side over on Temple School Road that we just bought last year. We thought we might need to do some preparation work for that site to make it more sellable. But as it turns out, there's so much interest in the site, I feel pretty sure we will not need to expend those dollars. So I think I'm very comfortable in moving the monies from that project to this downtown project. This is obviously a tremendously visible site that's been sitting there right in the heart of downtown. I'll also say that John Marshall, Wanda's husband, has been very active involved in this, and I think he feels good with the reworking of the site. We're able to add back a few things that he felt were important that would fit what Wanda would want in that site. So I think it's a good move, and I appreciate the staff's hard work. As you can see, we've got a great price from Bloom. Even though it's above our budget, it's $550,000 below the next highest one, and I think it's obviously because they're doing the work on the Caladium project just across 3rd Street there.
Yep.
Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. McIntosh, this is your ward, I believe.
Yep, I want to chime in with the mayor's comment there about Bloom. We were really happy to hear that Bloom won this bid, and part of the reason that they were able to come in underneath is that they are doing a project across the street. So timing is important here. I know they want to get started on both projects, and this will allow us to sort of streamline that and make that happen more quickly. During this process, we've gone through and looked at really kind of value engineering this to the point where it was something that we wouldn't be proud of. So we came back and said there are some things that we really need to keep in this project because it is going to be such a central focus in the city of Winston-Salem. Downtown is our calling card. Downtown really is a place now that gets used by people from all over the city. The demographics of the people who attend downtown is very, very good. I think it reflects the population of the city. This is a big deal, and from a timing standpoint, this unfortunately is coming at a time where just the construction business is so the costs are rising so rapidly that if we don't, as time goes on, this thing gets more expensive every month. So I would really like to see us improve this right away.
Okay, two folks want to comment. Mr. Larson, you're next.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. This project's long overdue, and the sooner we can get this thing underway, the better off. I think everybody's anxious to see something happen. Certainly, Mershaw has been very patient with us in trying to get this thing going. In that regard, as this falls now into the city's tent or bailiwick, how are we accounting for that within city government? Whose house is this going to live in as far as supervising this project?
Councilmember Larson, I'm sorry, I don't know if somebody else was trying to speak. I couldn't see.
Go ahead, Mr. King.
Councilmember Larson, I guess the short answer to that is it'll be mine in the short term. I'll be helping to oversee and coordinate and make sure this thing stays on track.
Well, let's push it. Thank you.
Ms. Adams, you're next.
Thank you. As I discussed with Councilmember McIntosh earlier today, I'm not trying to rain on Mercer Park, but to me, the question that you asked Councilmember Clark, that's what I asked of Mr. King and them today. I need to see the actual, like how we present things when we start moving money out of these bonds to other projects. I need to see how much money was in the bond, that deal, economic wise. I know that we didn't use it all for Temple, I got it. But again, it goes back to this conversation I've had before. Is who decides where the money goes when the rest of us don't know it's being divvied out? I'm just keeping it real. I don't have a problem with that park. But again, earlier I mentioned the overruns and the delays. The council needs to be well aware of the cost of where the money's going to come from. And if we're pulling money from economic development for a park, then that means it's free will for all of us then. But how do I get at the front of the line to get anything that I want if it's already been decided that we got to finish Marshall Park? Again, I have no problem with that. One, how much was Marshall Park up for to be done? Two, how much money have we put in it to date? And three, how much money is going to be all in by the time it's finished that we think? And again, I'd like to see the bond, Ms. Saunders, Mr. Garrity, Mr. King. Every time we do this, the council needs to have a matrix report of where this money is coming from, where was it supposed to be going, and where now are we diverting it to? And again, a policy or process, Mr. Garrity, of how we decide what projects get funded with these extra monies. You know, I look at it like a small business. I'm trying to get my bid in for my project. How do I get in on it when these things happen without not getting at least to the front of the line or being equally heard? And I'm sure that some other council members on here thinking it, won't say it, but they thinking it.
Okay, do we get those questions down? And also I'd add to those if we could get a little more information on the 2018 economic development pot. With that, Mr. McIntosh, you want to make a motion? This is your area. Is
Motion to approve?
there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second on G5. I'll poll the committee. Ms. Adams?
I'm going to abstain, Mr. Clark, until I get the information that I asked for.
Okay. Mr. McIntosh?
Aye.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes.
And chair votes yes. And we did get that information, those questions down. We'll have that Monday night. We will now go to G6.
Item G6, consideration of items relating to the Recovery Grants Program for small businesses and nonprofits.
Mr. Tesh, why don't you introduce this, or whoever you would like.
I'm sorry, Mr. Clark, my computer cut out. What did you say, Councilmember Clark?
We're on G6. The guy got your name, that, and Miss Olivia, whoever would like to give us some information on this.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry about that. My internet cut out just for a second. I will, give me 1 second and I will share my screen for this.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Chair, Mayor Pro Tem, and members of the City Council. There are two ARPA-related items on the agenda today. This first one is related to the Recovery Grants Program for small businesses and nonprofits. As indicated in the CARF, the city has received to date about half of its $51.7 million in American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, local coronavirus local fiscal recovery funds. We will receive that second amount next year in 2022 in May. The item before you would specifically do three things, and then we have a presentation on the eligibility for the programs. Would appropriate $3 million, $1 million each for small businesses, social service nonprofits, and travel, tourism, and hospitality nonprofits to make them
You have a
eligible
slide for that?
Yes, sir. I do.
Let's move it. Keep the slide with you.
Give me just a second to get through this. So this is what it looks like in terms of the program itself. Again, $1 million each for small businesses, social service nonprofits, and travel, tourism, and hospitality nonprofits, with a maximum award of $25,000 per entity. This is an area where we spoke with the city attorney's office and looked at guidance at the state level from the state attorney general. Our ability to give grants to for-profit businesses is very limited. And so the maximum award amount is something that we've seen as eligible in other jurisdictions. And so again, 25,000 per being the maximum based on how this was scoped and what we know to be legal at this point. We'll go directly into the criteria. I hope the PowerPoint is working. Does everyone see the slide?
No, we're on the first page.
Okay, wonderful.
Now nothing's up there, except everyone's pretty faces.
All right, let me see if I can do this one more time.
Everybody hold tight. Yes, we're there. It says
Okay.
proposed programs minimum criteria.
Okay, so again, three pots, $1 million each. If we go to the bottom there, what you'll see are the criteria for all of the programs. The entity must be located inside the city limits, must have been functioning prior to the onset of the pandemic. And the way this has been scoped is that the entity must have been behind on mortgage, rent, lease, or utility payments at the time of the application, with obligations incurred before the city council approves this. So basically, anyone who's behind on their rent, mortgage, utilities would be eligible for the program. On the small business side, cannot be a chain, must be independently owned, and no more than 25 full-time employees is how we've defined a small business here, again, based on what we've seen from other jurisdictions and what we know to be legal. On the nonprofit side, defining it slightly differently in terms of having an organizational budget of less than $1 million, not including any pass-through funds. Have to have the board approve of this, can't just have an executive director. And they must have documentation showing that they are servicing low to moderate income areas, either specifically in a QCT or in a census tract that has essentially the same demographic information with income, so average household income under $50,000. So these are the basic general eligibility criteria. I am going to try and advance this slide, and I'm going to hope it works for us. Can everyone see the pool lottery approach slide? Okay.
Yeah, it reads round 1 and round 2.
Yes, sir. So the way these funds would be administered, we would have an application process, receive all of those applications. In round 1, entities that are in qualified census tracts, 25 grants would be made in each category, specifically to entities in qualified census tracts. After that, we would have a lottery that would go outside of the QCTs. Anyone in a QCT that did not receive a grant the first time around would be automatically entered into round 2, and we would go through that again for areas that are in QCTs or census tracts with a median household income below $50,000. And just a note down there at the bottom, if all of the funds are not spent, the city council could choose to use this for any other ARPA eligible purpose. So that is the method under which we would provide the funds. So it's not that anyone is being selected for merit-based criteria. If you meet the eligibility criteria, you are in arrears, you are put in the pool to potentially receive a grant. If not all of the funds are exhausted, then everyone who applies would get the grant. If the funds are exhausted, then again, this lottery approach would be used.
Okay.
Moving on, just a note of where the qualified census tracts are. So we have two maps here. This one shows the QCTs, and then there's a second map here that is an overlay, and it's a little more difficult to see, and I apologize. You can see the yellow outline are the qualified census tracts. Everything that is in dark red or burnt orange that is outside of the yellow is an area that would be available in round 2 per what is being scoped here. And so you can see, starting on the north side of the city and moving around, that there are some areas outside of qualified census tracts that still have average household incomes under $50,000 that would be eligible in round 2.
Okay.
That is the general eligibility for the program. I would note the item also allows the city manager to enter into a contract with the United Way of Forsyth County as a federal subrecipient to be the administrator of these programs. We'll note again, the United Way would not be determining who gets the grant. They would be determining if people are eligible and then doing the lottery to determine who would get the grant funding if there were more requests than available funding. Also in this item is a request and a budget amendment for an additional position related to ARPA that would be used explicitly for grant monitoring and compliance efforts.
Okay. Questions, comments? Ms. Adams, and you're on mute.
I guess y'all can tell I'm healthy today.
Yay.
I saw where we had the Chamber and United Way that sent the proposals in. My only concern about United Way, and in a way, I guess we're okay, because I'm hearing from a lot of my colleagues all over the country that because they don't have the resources that cities like ours have, they're struggling. They're going to have to bring in outside consultants from across the country, and along with the NLC and the government to manage their money and how they get it out. My question or concern is, I know United Way has been in the community forever, but the community at large that they serve, some of us, they don't have that great a reputation when it comes to programming. I don't know whether many of you see some of the commentaries on Facebook and social media about it, but how do we ensure that the programming and what we're asking them to do will be done to our requirements and expectations to ensure that the people, the recipients, the small businesses and others and nonprofits are dealt with as customers in a very great way? That's the only thing I'm concerned about, Mr. Tesh.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am, Mayor Pro Tem Adams. We would have an agreement with United Way of Forsyth County, and as we work through the details of that, we'll have things related to timeliness to ensure that they are not holding or sitting on anything, that we do get the funds out. And again, they will not be making any decisions about merit-based application of this. It is all minimum eligibility criteria. So if you meet the eligibility that the city council set forward, then you are automatically eligible and would go into the lottery pool.
Do you think the citizens or the possible recipients of these grants feel comfortable with our marketing and education piece so that they understand? Have we utilized everything we can to ensure that people understand the requirements at a level that they get it? Or is it that I know the government, we have this bubble we have to operate in, but if we, and I keep hearing this too on these calls and meetings I'm on, that if we're not making sure or running it by some others with fresh eyes to say, you know what, this is not This is not going to cut it. This is not going to meet or get the people or the applicants or the pool that we want. How do you feel about that, Mr. Tesh?
Well, I would have two answers to that, Mayor Pro Tem. One, we will ensure that we get the word out about this program. I think there are questions as to the total need. Is there $3 million worth of pent-up demand in terms of arrears for these types of payments for small businesses and small nonprofits? And my response to that would be, these are our recovery grants. We want to get this money out into the community as fast as we can for this purpose. And any of that funding that is not used could be used and scoped for an additional program for small businesses or nonprofits with different eligibility criteria for specific programs and specific outcomes if we wanted to look at it and if the city attorney deemed it legal and eligible.
Mr. Tesh and Mr. Garrett and Councilmember Clark, Chair Clark, is it possible, again, as I've stated, that it's our responsibility to review the strategy and the process on a regular basis, that it comes to committee, another committee next month, to look at how they're marketing this, how they're getting it out to these small businesses and people that need it the most, because it's not like next week the money's going out. So I think we have a window of opportunity to ensure at least one more time, as they say, take a look at it and say, we feel pretty confident about our process.
I think it would be helpful if assuming this gets approved, that we have United Way come back at some appropriate time with their plan. I think what Ms. Adams is getting at is, and I'm a small business owner, it's hard to get a hold of all of them because they're small businesses. You can find the big guys in town. It's the little guys that are hard to find. And it's going to take some creativity in that area. So I'd certainly think it would be appropriate periodically for United Way to come back to us. Ms. Scipio, did you have your hand up? Mm-hmm. You have the floor.
Yeah. Yes, thank you so much. I think Mr. Larson had his hand up first.
Okay, John?
A couple quick questions. It looks to me like we're also spending almost $1 million, $799,000 on a ARP coordinator and grants monitoring. And I assume they're backstopping or working with United Way in the implementation of these grant programs. So is that what their job is?
Councilmember Larson, those two positions, again, that's fully funding those positions through the end of 2026. One is an Arpa coordinator who serves internally, basically as a program manager for all of these funds. That is Ms. Tiffany Oliva. And then that second position that we would be looking at is specifically for grant monitoring and compliance. So as not only we stand up these programs, but we spend the additional $45+ million, that would be a second line of defense after the program managers, ensuring that the correct documentation and audit backup is followed for all of these programs.
Well, the point is that United Way is not out there by themselves, that there's somebody else there sort of paying attention to this matter as well, right? Is that what this?
Yes, sir. As a federal subrecipient, we are required to do expenditure tracking and grant monitoring. And so that compliance position would be doing exactly that.
Let me ask a question about the criterion, the basic criteria. We spent some time looking at back due rent and utilities and stuff like that. Why was we not considering economic impact of the pandemic on small businesses economically, where, for example, reserve funds or loans were taken out to keep a business afloat during that period of time, and in consideration for these $25,000 grants? Why is that economic impact not a consideration?
I think there are two. Excuse me, Councilmember Larson, I think there are two issues there. The first was in terms of what state law would allow was the amount at $25,000. And then what we looked at really were other grant programs and how difficult they were to access in terms of calculating what it meant to have used reserve funds or lost revenue, the types of financial statements that would be required for that, and review. I believe that Greater Winston-Salem, Inc. had set up a program that allowed certain minority and women business enterprises to apply for funds. And we had gotten feedback that the amount of financial documentation and disclosures that were part of that application process made it a barrier for many of the small businesses that wanted access. And so limiting it to arrears and rent, mortgage, and utilities made it what we've deemed ERAP for business, making it a little easier to say, we are behind, here's the notice that we're behind, and we could pay that vendor directly rather than giving the money to the business itself, which made it a lot easier on the auditing requirements as well.
I see. That last question, if I may, we're giving the 25, we're dedicating 25 grants to the QCT category. And each of those grants presumably could be as much as $25,000. How much is left then for non-QCT organizations?
If all of those grants and QCTs were $25,000, it would leave, I believe, a little over $300,000 for the rest of the pot in each one of those categories, there being 3 categories.
That's right.
So their application would be the same process as the QCTs, except they would.
It would be one application process, and then we would do round 1 with entities that are just in qualified census tracts, and then we would open it up. All of the one application period altogether, most likely about 4 weeks long, that we would market heavily. But yes, the QCTs first, and then non-QCTs from the same applicant pool afterwards.
So we're going back to QCTs twice for 25 and 25, right?
So it would be
tier 1, 2, both on 25 QCTs priority in both rounds.
QCT priority in round 1, and then anybody in a QCT that didn't get one in the priority round 1 would be automatically entered into round 2. So QCT is round 1 is a priority for qualified census tracts. Round 2 is everyone remaining that meets eligibility.
But they would be automatically entered, is what you're saying. They wouldn't be guaranteed.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Scipio.
Yes, I wanted to just also speak about access and getting the word out that Mayor Pro Tem spoke about, and also support for the small businesses who may not have staff to complete these applications. I don't know how complicated the application is, but I was privileged the early part of the pandemic to help a local benefactor grant small businesses some grants. And I actually helped to identify 45 businesses, but it was not a well-marketed program because it was just a private benefactor. But I hope we will put out a big push on this so people can hear about it, because oftentimes our small business people don't hear about it. They may or may not be on social media. They may or may not be getting the journal. So they need to hear about it and hear it often. And the other thing I would like to suggest is that we think about, just like we did the ERAP, take it to the neighborhoods where we have businesses that are more likely not to be able to apply because they may not have technical expertise, but have application workshops for the neighborhoods in the QCTs, for people to come out and be able to complete their application, perhaps in person, to establish that relationship that people really want more than anything is a personal relationship. If we're going to go to the most needy, we have to do non-traditional methods to identify them and to get them on board and not make it cumbersome through our processes. So I just want to encourage us to do that, and let us know, Mrs. Sketch, how soon we're going to start once we approve this. How soon are we going to start asking for applications? Because every council person needs to do their job in identifying those small businesses that are not on the mainstream, but they're in our neighborhoods, in our communities. And I also want you to consider just operating expenses, like salaries, if possible. Because if they're behind the mortgage, rent, lease, they have other things in their businesses that they probably have had to go without. And I would hope that we can open up a different way of granting them support other than just their mortgages and the rent and leasing and utilities. They have other operating things. So I hope we would think about expanding that eligibility. That's it. Thank you.
Councilmember Scipio, a direct reply to the payroll expenses portion. That is one that we heard from several council members, and it is through conversations very technically difficult to ensure or to validate that someone is behind on payroll, particularly for small businesses. And so that was something that we looked at, spoke with some partners over at Forsyth Tech at the Small Business Center, and really struggled with the appropriate backup documentation to do that. I know other jurisdictions have made the expenses available for that for eligibility, but they've done theirs based on lost revenue, I believe. And so from a strict expenditure perspective, it was very difficult to scope that for us. And that's why you don't see it as part of this program right now.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Tesh, quick question. I'm a small business person sitting out there right now, and I hear this and everything's going fine, but I say, well, I just won't pay my rent and my electricity bill in December and apply.
So specifically, Councilmember Clark, the way we have scoped this is that it has to be for arrears before you make this decision. So we could backdate it to this committee date so that people have seen it, but it would have been for anyone who missed a payment before next Monday is really the way we scoped it.
Gotcha. I think everybody had some very good comments. I do think the challenge you have, and we had it with the rent program, there's going to be some documentation, and a lot of small businesses don't keep the documentation that is needed. But I do think it's much easier to document an electric bill and a water bill and rent, because those are, I think, as straightforward as they go. Having said that, can I get a motion to approve this?
Move for approval.
We have a second.
Second.
We have a motion and second to approve. I will poll the committee. Ms. Adams.
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh.
Aye.
Mr. Taylor.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. That is approved, folks. We got one more item, and we got 8 minutes. G7.
Item G7, information on coronavirus local fiscal recovery fund, transformational phase scoring matrix.
Mr. Tesh, you got 8 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Clark. I will move as quickly as I can. I have a presentation for this one as well. And again, I apologize. It's not going to be in presentation mode, but I hope that the slides will continue to go along this way. So this presentation has two components. We just talked about the recovery grants for small businesses and nonprofits. This one is a precursor to what future more transformational projects could look like. There's an attachment to this which shows the scoring criteria. And so this is just a picture on the left side. I don't expect you to see that when it's that small, but staff has looked at matrices and eligibility criteria and scoring in other jurisdictions. And the internal steering committee came up with what you see here, the potential to rank future projects through an application process based on capacity being their ability to do the project and whether it aligns with their mission, the impact or community need, defining that there is an actual need in the community for the program or project that they are looking to do, the demographic distribution, really you see QCTs there. So are they in a QCT, or do they have or will be servicing people who are demographically similar to those in QCTs? Would a project align with the City Council's strategic plan? And again, we had that on the consent agenda today, but we'll review it at the Community Development, Housing, and General Government more thoroughly tomorrow. But which tier of the strategic plan it aligns to? Collaboration throughout the community. Have you involved the right stakeholders and are proposing to partner with and collaborate with those people who can make a difference? administration and reporting. So the ability of the organization to do that, as well as for us to report on it, looks at subrecipient risk scores and things of that nature. Funding stability, one of our values with this money was to ensure that we didn't fund something that would not be able to continue. So we would look at their funding streams for future years for programs, and then board representation speaks directly to the diversity of the board for the applicant. Again, moving through this relatively quickly, the backup documentation shows as much as possible the definitions and then the objective distinctions between levels. So for each of those criteria that you just saw, a scoring panel could assign 0, 3, or 5 points. Staff has done, I think, a very good job of trying to make that, again, objective so that we know exactly whether 0, 3, or 5 points should be assigned to it. But in many ways, there will be a level of subjectivity in some of these. What specifically are we going to use this for? Again, with feedback from City Council, this would potentially be used to score transformational project applications in the economic and social assistance areas. So things related to poverty alleviation, workforce development, and small business assistance. The potential is for this to be scoped only for nonprofits to be eligible for this. Private businesses would not be eligible. And that scores would be probably tiered as they are received, providing a relative assessment of the project ranking. So using this matrix, we wouldn't want to definitively say that somebody that scored a 400 is better than someone who scored a 395, but that those are probably relative. So we would provide those scores and then again, put them in tiers most likely for review. So this, if you have any specific questions about that document that was attached, I'd be more than happy to go through those. And if not, I've got about 2 minutes and I can do the rest of this presentation as a general ARPA eligibility update.
Keep going, because this is just information tonight.
Okay, so a quick eligibility update in terms of the interim final rule and the frequently asked questions. Neither of those have been updated here recently. The last update to the FAQs was in late July, I believe. We are still waiting on a final rule. We have been attending courses from the School of Government as well as listening to other professional organizations. And so you'll see one change over here on the right to highlight. And in terms of things that we're discussing, the application of uniform guidance. So uniform guidance is what the federal government requires us to follow for every single grant. We are diving more into how that uniform guidance applies to ARPA, which is substantially different than when you apply for a grant, rather than them just making money available. So again, this one real change here on the right, have gotten some guidance from attorneys at the School of Government and the City Attorney's Office. Has preliminarily ruled based on what we see in the language that infrastructure related to programs and services may not be eligible. So that little bullet pointed list on the right is where infrastructure is specifically allowed in the interim final rule or FAQs. Outside of those specific instances and examples, we do not have specific authority to buy and develop land and build buildings. So it's a pretty tight list there. I know there have been a couple of projects where council members have requested, could we do this or not? And the guidance that we're getting from the School of Government suggests that only in these areas would we be able to invest in infrastructure. And the last note there is we are still waiting on the final rule. We expect those FAQs to be updated with additional eligibility. There is currently a federal act out there that you see, the State, Local, Tribal, and Territorial Fiscal Recovery Infrastructure and Disaster Relief Flexibility Act. It's a mouthful. It would allow us to use up to $10 million or 30% for transportation infrastructure, other infrastructure, or any governmental purpose. So I just want to note there's potential flexibility coming if they pass that. Obviously, we will be looking at the infrastructure bill that was just passed. It's about 2,500 pages long. So we'll be working with our partner organizations on that. And the last note here, Build Back Better Act was released, including $1.75 million in potential federal funding, much of which aligns with what will be in the Mayor and City Council strategic plan. As you see things specifically called out there in preschool and affordable housing and things of that nature. So we are monitoring trillions of dollars potentially in federal legislation. I know that is really quick, and we're at 5:59. Any questions, I'd be more than happy to take them or take them and provide a report back later.
This is just for information. Any initial questions? And I can't, Scott, can you eliminate your thing? I can't see anybody.
Yes, sir.
If anybody has any questions or comments, you can raise your hand. I can see most of you.
Chair, I've got some, but I'll send them to Scott directly.
Okay, and I would suggest everybody, that most important chart you couldn't read, it was so small. So everybody take the time to look at this. We're still coming up with the procedures in this area. I do know if y'all are like me, I'm getting a lot of calls from folks that are kind of in this category of transformative type of request. And just let everybody know that we continue to fine tune that. With that, we are finished, and it is 1 till 6. Mr. Taylor, how about 6:05, 6:10? What would you like?
Public safety will begin at approximately 6:10.
6:10, public safety. With that, thank everybody for joining us today. We are adjourned.